It was one of those ordinary afternoons that seemed to pass without much notice. The sky was clear, the road ahead calm, and she was driving home after finishing another long day at the kindergarten. The laughter of her students still echoed in her mind, and though she was tired, there was a soft smile on her face. She loved her job. Teaching children gave her a sense of peace, a kind of joy that money could never buy. The radio hummed quietly, and she was lost in thought when suddenly she saw smoke rising in the distance. At first, she thought it was just someone burning trash by the roadside. But as she got closer, she realized it wasn't that. Her heart started to pound. The smoke was thick and black, and soon she saw flashing lights, people gathered around, and the faint sound of someone shouting. A car had crashed on the side of the road. The front was smashed in, and flames were starting to creep up from under the hood. Several people stood nearby, talking, filming, or simply frozen in shock. No one seemed to be moving closer. She slowed her car and pulled over, her hands trembling slightly. Then she heard it, a cry. A child's cry, faint but desperate, coming from inside the burning vehicle. Without thinking, she threw open her door and ran toward the car. Someone tried to stop her, shouting, "It's going to blow," but she didn't stop. In that moment, her only thought was that a little one was trapped inside and time was running out. The heat hit her face as she got closer, and the smell of burning rubber filled the air. She could barely see through the smoke. She covered her mouth with her sleeve and peered through the window. Inside, she saw a toddler strapped in a car seat, crying uncontrollably, his tiny hands reaching out as if begging for help. The driver's seat was empty, and there was no adult in sight. She pulled at the handle, but the door wouldn't open. She looked around, searching for something to break the glass. A man nearby tossed her a small rock, but it barely made a crack. Then she spotted a loose metal rod near the road barrier. She grabbed it, her palms burning from the heat, and struck the window with all her strength. Once, twice, 3 times, until the glass finally shattered. The child screamed, startled, but she reached in quickly, unlocking the door from the inside. Flames were spreading faster now. She leaned in, unbuckled the straps, and carefully lifted the toddler out. His cheeks were wet with tears, his small body shaking. She held him close, shielding him with her arms as she ran away from the car. Just a few seconds after she got to the side of the road, the car burst into louder flames. People gasped and backed away. She crouched down, still holding the child, whispering softly, "You're safe now, sweetheart. You're okay." The little one clung to her neck, sobbing, but she could feel his heartbeat calming slowly. An ambulance arrived within minutes, followed by firefighters who began spraying water to control the fire. Paramedics rushed to check the child while others asked her questions. She was coughing from the smoke, her hand slightly burned, but she kept saying she was fine. The only thing that mattered was that the boy was safe. Someone had filmed the entire rescue, and by the time she got home that evening, her phone was buzzing with messages. Her face was already on the news. Reporters were calling her a hero, a brave woman who had risked her life to save a stranger's child. But she didn't feel like a hero. She felt shaken, exhausted, and overwhelmed. That night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fire, the smoke, and that terrified child's face. She thought of what could have happened if she had been even a minute late. Her small apartment felt strangely quiet, and for the first time she cried. Not out of fear, but relief. The next morning, she went back to her usual routine. The children in her class were excited, though many were too young to understand why she had been on TV. One little girl hugged her and said, "My mama said you saved a baby." She smiled and just said, "I did what anyone would do." But deep down, she knew most people wouldn't have run toward the fire. Later that day, she received a call from the hospital. The little boy was safe and recovering well. The nurse said his father wanted to meet her. She hesitated for a moment. She didn't know who the father was, but from the tone of the nurse's voice, it sounded like someone important. That evening, she went to the hospital. The child was asleep in a small bed, a tiny bandage on his arm, but otherwise fine. Standing near the bed was a tall man in a dark suit. He looked powerful, the kind of man used to being in control. His eyes, however, told a different story. A mix of fear, gratitude, and something softer, something broken. He turned toward her as she entered, his voice low. "You're the one who saved my son." She nodded quietly. "Yes, but I'm just glad he's okay." For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped forward and said, I don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you, I would have lost him. She smiled gently. You don't have to thank me. Anyone would have done the same. But he shook his head firmly. No, he said. Not anyone. He reached into his jacket and took out a check, offering it to her. The amount written was large, more than she had earned in years. She looked at it, then at him, and quietly said, I can't take this. He looked surprised. Why not? You saved my child's life, she replied softly. Because I didn't do it for money. I just couldn't stand there and watch. He studied her face, clearly puzzled. He was a man used to deals, to people doing things for something in return. Her refusal left him speechless. Finally, he said, At least let me help you in some way. She shook her head and smiled kindly. Just take care of your boy. That's all the thanks I need. With that, she turned to leave. He stood there watching her go, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Humility. In the days that followed, the story spread everywhere. Social media was filled with her picture, the woman in a plain shirt and jeans carrying a child out of the flames. Reporters wanted interviews, brands wanted her to endorse them, but she quietly stayed away from all of it. She went back to teaching, reading stories to her students, and living her quiet life. Meanwhile, the man whose son she had saved couldn't forget her words. He found himself thinking about her more than he expected. He had built his entire life on success and power, rarely trusting anyone. People always had a reason to approach him. Money, influence, connections. But she had none of that. She didn't even tell him her last name when she left. A few days later, he drove to her school. The principal greeted him nervously, surprised to see such a high-profile visitor, but he said he was there to make a donation, to improve safety measures, provide better play areas, and help underprivileged students. When she saw him standing by the classroom door, she looked both surprised and uncertain. He smiled slightly and said, I just wanted to visit, to see where you work. She invited him inside, and the children instantly surrounded him, curious and excited. He crouched down to talk to them, clearly unused to such innocence. Something about their laughter softened him. For the first time in years, he felt something genuine, uncalculated. After class, she thanked him for the donation, but he waved it off, saying, It's the least I can do. You reminded me what matters. She looked at him a little puzzled. What do you mean? He sighed, almost embarrassed by his own honesty. I've spent my life chasing success. I thought that's what made a person strong. But when you ran into that fire, you showed me what real strength looks like. Her eyes softened. I wasn't trying to prove anything, she said quietly. Sometimes you just do what your heart tells you. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's what I've been missing. As he left that day, something had shifted inside him. The woman who had saved his child hadn't just rescued a life. She had awakened something in him he thought was long gone. Kindness. Humanity. That night, he sat in his office looking at a picture of his son sleeping peacefully. For years, he had measured his worth in deals, power, and control. But that simple act of courage from a stranger had changed the way he saw everything. And somewhere, across town, she sat by her window sipping tea, unaware that her small act of bravery had begun to change not just one life, but two. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly went back to normal, at least on the surface. But for both of them, something had changed forever. For her, the memory of that burning car and the terrified child still came back in flashes, though she tried not to dwell on it. For him, every time he looked at his son, he was reminded of the moment he almost lost him, and the woman who risked everything to bring him back. She had returned to her calm routine, spending her mornings teaching songs and stories to little children, her evenings marking notebooks or preparing crafts for the next day. She didn't think much about the man whose son she had saved. In her mind, they lived in different worlds. He was rich, powerful, and always surrounded by people, while she was just an ordinary teacher living quietly in a rented apartment. But in his world, she had left an echo that refused to fade. The man had everything people usually wanted: a mansion, cars, a company that made headlines, and employees who bowed when he entered a room. Yet since that day, he had been feeling something unfamiliar: gratitude, curiosity, a strange kind of respect that wouldn't go away. Small things, other times about life. He started sharing things he had never told anyone: how he had lost his wife years ago in an illness, how his success had come at the cost of his peace, how loneliness had become something he stopped noticing until she showed him another way to live. She listened, never judging, never interrupting. Sometimes she shared little parts of her own story too, how she grew up in a small town, how teaching had always been her dream, and how she believed kindness was the only thing that made life worth living. Their talks became longer, often stretching into the late evening after the children had gone home. They would walk along the small road beside the school, talking about things that didn't seem important to others but meant everything to them. People started noticing. Teachers whispered quietly, curious about their growing closeness. Some found it sweet. Others were skeptical. "He's a businessman," one said. "He'll forget about her once the headlines fade." But she didn't pay attention to gossip. She saw the change in him, the way he spoke gently now, the way his eyes softened whenever he was around children or when she laughed. One afternoon, the local news published a story about his new foundation, praising his efforts for child safety and community welfare. The article included a picture of him standing beside the school, and though her name wasn't mentioned, some people quickly recognized her face in the background. Soon, the rumors began. Some said he was helping her because he liked her. Others said she was trying to gain his favor. The gossip spread fast, and before long she began to feel uncomfortable. Parents started asking questions, and a few teachers avoided mentioning his name. One evening, she found him standing near the playground after everyone had left. He looked troubled. She walked up to him and asked softly, "You heard about it, didn't you?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted to help," she sighed. "I know you didn't, but people like to talk. They don't always understand kindness." He looked at her for a long moment. "Does it bother you, what they're saying?" She hesitated. "Not really, but it's difficult. I don't want the children or the school to get affected." He nodded again, his jaw tightening slightly. "I can fix this. I'll make a statement." She stopped him gently. "No, please don't. The more we talk, the bigger it becomes. It's better to just let it fade." He looked like he wanted to argue, but then he saw the calmness in her eyes and sighed. "All right." There was silence between them for a while. Then she said softly, "You've already done so much. Maybe you should step back for a bit, just until things quiet down." He turned away, staring at the swings. "If that's what you want." "It's not what I want," she said quietly. "It's what's best right now." He nodded, though his eyes said something else. Over the next few weeks, he stopped visiting. The school felt strangely quieter without him. The children still played and laughed, but she often caught herself glancing at the gate, half expecting to see him walk in. She told herself it was better this way, less complicated, but her heart didn't always agree. Meanwhile, he buried himself in work again, but it wasn't the same. The meetings, the noise, the endless plans, none of it filled the emptiness he felt. He missed their talks, her calm voice, the way she looked at him without judgment. One evening, he found himself driving past the school. He stopped the car for a moment, watching from a distance as the last few children were picked up by their parents. The building looked peaceful, bathed in the soft glow of sunset. He smiled faintly, then drove away before anyone saw him. Days later, she received a letter in her mailbox. There was no name on the envelope, just a small note inside. It read, "Sometimes silence is harder than noise, but I understand why you needed it. Just know that I'm still thankful every day. For my son, for your kindness, and for what you reminded me of. That goodness still exists." She folded the note and kept it in her drawer. That night she couldn't stop thinking about it. A few months passed. The rumors slowly faded, replaced by other stories, and life returned to its ordinary pace. One morning, she was sitting in her classroom when she received a call from a local community center. They were inviting her to a small event celebrating road safety awareness. When she arrived, she realized it was hosted by his foundation. She didn't see him at first. The hall was filled with parents, children, and volunteers. But then, near the stage, she spotted him talking to a group of guests. Their eyes met from across the room, and for a moment it was as if time paused. He walked toward her, smiling softly. "I wasn't sure if you'd come." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "But I'm glad I did." They talked quietly in a corner, away from the crowd. He told her about the progress of his projects, the safety programs, the scholarships, and how his son was growing stronger every day. She listened, genuinely proud of how much he had done. "You've changed a lot," she said with a smile. He looked at her gently. "You taught me how." For a few seconds they said nothing, but in that silence, everything that had been left unsaid before was clear. There was respect, admiration, and something deeper, a connection that didn't need names or promises. When the event ended, he walked her to her car. The night air was cool and the stars were faint but visible. Before she left, he said softly, "You know, I used to believe that people only entered your life for a reason. To teach you, to test you, or to change you. I think you did all three." She looked at him, her heart full, and said, "Maybe we were both meant to learn something from each other." He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Maybe we were. She drove away that night feeling lighter than she had in months. As the city lights blurred past her window, she realized something beautiful. Sometimes people meet by accident, but their connection isn't one. It's fate quietly doing its work. And back at the event hall, he stood looking at the spot where she had been standing, the faint echo of her words still in his ears. He knew then that some people change your life not with promises, but with presence, and that her kindness had not only saved his child, but had gently healed the loneliness he had carried for years. After the event, life seemed to move forward quietly, but deep inside, both of them carried a new kind of calm. Their friendship had grown stronger, more grounded. They didn't need to talk every day or see each other often. There was a quiet understanding between them, a connection that didn't need constant words to survive. He was busier than ever, managing his foundation and his business, but the difference was clear now. He was no longer the same man he used to be. He spent more time with his son, took him to school, read him bedtime stories, and often talked about simple things he once thought were unimportant. His world had grown warmer, more human. One evening, while watching his son draw, the little boy suddenly said, "Daddy, you're smiling more now." He laughed softly and asked, "Is that a bad thing?" The boy shook his head. "No, it's nice. You used to look sad all the time." He sat there quietly thinking about those words. Maybe the boy was right. He had been sad without realizing it. Success had built walls around him, and kindness had been the only thing strong enough to break them. Meanwhile, she continued her simple routine at the school. Her students adored her, parents respected her, and even though she didn't have much, she was content. Every so often, she would receive a small note or a message from him, sometimes just a few words like, "I hope your day is peaceful," or "The children must be keeping you busy." She always replied politely, never letting their bond turn into something complicated. But life, as always, had its way of testing people when they least expect it. One morning, she arrived at school to find reporters standing outside the gate. Cameras, microphones, and flashing lights. Her heart sank. The head teacher met her at the door, whispering nervously, "They're here about him. They've been asking questions about you." She was confused at first, but soon it became clear. A business magazine had published an article about his personal life, calling him the billionaire who found his heart. The story mentioned the car accident, his son's rescue, and hinted at a mysterious woman who had inspired his transformation. Though her name wasn't printed, the clues were enough for people to guess. By the afternoon, social media was filled with photos of her, screenshots from old news clips, pictures from the school, and wild speculations. Some people called it a love story. Others accused her of using his fame for attention. She sat alone in the classroom after the children went home, reading the comments on her phone. Some were kind, but many were cruel. She saved his kid for publicity. She's after his money. Of course he changed. Anyone would if they met someone like her. Her hands trembled as she put the phone down. She didn't deserve this. All she had ever done was follow her heart in a moment of danger. Now it felt like her kindness was being twisted into something else. That evening she received a call from him. His voice was tense. "I just saw the news," he said. "I'm so sorry this happened," she sighed. "You didn't write it?" "No," he replied. "But they won't stop unless I say something." She was quiet for a moment. "And what will you say? That it's not true? That I'm just a stranger who once saved your son?" He hesitated. "If it will protect you, yes." Her chest tightened. Don't make me sound like a stranger. I don't want to be part of the noise, that's all. He wanted to argue, to defend her, but she stopped him gently. Sometimes silence is stronger than words. Let it fade. After the call ended, she sat by her window for a long time, staring at the streetlights. The peace she once had felt distant. She missed the quiet before the world had found out about their story. For a few days, the attention only grew worse. Reporters showed up near her home, waiting for her to step outside. Parents started whispering when she arrived at school. Some even suggested she take time off just until things calmed down. Finally, she decided to leave town for a while. She packed a small bag and took a bus to visit her aunt in a nearby village. The air there was clean, the nights quiet. She spent her days walking by the river, helping with chores and trying to find peace again. Back in the city, he was furious. He confronted his company's PR team, demanding they stop feeding information to the press. He wanted to protect her, but she had vanished without telling anyone where she went. He tried calling a few times, but the calls went unanswered. One night, after putting his son to bed, he sat alone in his study. The house felt too large, too empty. He realized that all his success, all his power couldn't fix the one thing that mattered, peace of heart. He missed her presence, her calm voice, the way she made everything feel grounded. Weeks went by before he finally received a message from her. It was short. "I'm okay. Please don't worry. I just needed quiet for a while," he replied instantly. "Take all the time you need, but don't disappear forever." She didn't respond. Months later, she returned to the city quietly. The media had moved on to news stories, and the school had returned to its normal routine. When she walked into her classroom that morning, the children ran to hug her, shouting with excitement. Their warmth melted the heaviness inside her. That afternoon, as she was leaving, she saw a familiar car parked near the gate. He stepped out, looking relieved the moment their eyes met. "You're back," he said softly. She nodded. "Yes, I needed some distance." "I understand," he said. "I missed talking to you." She smiled faintly. "I missed peace," he let out a quiet laugh. "Fair enough." Then his face turned serious. "I wanted to apologize again. For everything. For not protecting your privacy better." "You couldn't have stopped it," she said. "People always find stories to tell." He nodded. "Still, I wish I had done more." They walked together down the quiet road, talking about small things. The children, the weather, his son's new school project. For a while it felt almost like before, like nothing had changed. But something had. There was a new awareness between them. Not distance, but a quiet caution born from experience. Over the next few weeks, he visited occasionally. Always respectful, always careful not to draw attention. The children loved seeing him again, and she didn't mind as long as things stayed calm. One afternoon, as they sat under a tree watching the kids play, he said, "You know, I've been thinking about how strange life is. A year ago, I didn't even know you existed. Now I can't imagine my life without the lessons you've taught me." She looked at him with a soft smile. "Maybe that's how life works. We meet people when we're ready to learn something new." He nodded slowly. "You taught me to see people, not just things. To listen, to slow down." She laughed lightly. "And you taught me that change is possible, even for those who seem unshakable." There was a comfortable silence between them. He glanced at her and said, "You're the first person who's ever talked to me like I'm just a man, not someone powerful." She looked at him kindly. "That's because that's all you are, a man, a father, a human being. The rest is just noise." He stared at her for a moment, quietly moved by her words. "I think that's why I keep coming back here. This is the only place where the noise stops." That day, as they said goodbye, something shifted again. It wasn't romantic or dramatic, and it was quiet, real and deep. He realized he didn't need grand gestures to feel connected to her. Just being around her reminded him who he wanted to be. Later that evening, he went home and found his son waiting with a drawing in hand. It showed 3 figures, him, his son, and her, standing under a big sun with the words, "My family of kindness," written above. He looked at the drawing for a long time, his eyes soft. Maybe the boy understood something that neither of them had put into words yet. It wasn't about love in the usual sense. It was about belonging, about 2 lives that had crossed paths for a reason neither could have planned. She didn't know about that drawing, but in her own quiet space that night, she sat by the window thinking about him and the strange, Gentle friendship that had changed both of their lives. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing. True kindness always finds a way to heal hearts, even the ones that seemed impossible to reach. And far away in his quiet house, he whispered a promise to himself that no matter where life led them next, he would never forget the woman who had run into the fire, not just to save a child, but to unknowingly save him too. Months passed quietly after that. The noise from the media had faded, and both of them had settled into their own calm rhythms again. The world had moved on to other stories, but what remained between them was something deeper, something steady and real. He was a different man now. People around him noticed it too. His employees said he smiled more often, and his business meetings felt less like battles and more like conversations. His son, who once used to cling to his nanny, now proudly held his father's hand everywhere they went. There was warmth in their home again, laughter in the halls, drawings on the fridge, small ordinary moments that once felt impossible. He often thought about her when life got heavy. He didn't always call or visit, but her presence lived quietly in his thoughts. Sometimes, when he saw a teacher crossing the street with children, or when he passed by a small school playground, he found himself smiling unconsciously. It reminded him of her steady courage and the calm way she faced the world. One day, while reading a report about road safety, he remembered her saying something months ago, that saving one life was worth any effort. That simple line had stayed with him, like a seed planted in his mind. That evening, he called his assistant and said, "I want to start something, not just another donation or a project, but something that actually helps people like her do what they do." Within weeks, a new idea began to take shape. He founded a charitable organization focused on road safety awareness, emergency response training, and child welfare programs. He made sure the organization's goal was simple: to make ordinary people feel capable of extraordinary help, just as she once did. But there was one condition: her name would never be used publicly. He wanted her kindness to stay pure, away from attention or fame. When the foundation launched, it made quiet headlines. There was no grand party, no cameras, just real work beginning quietly behind the scenes. Ambulances were donated to small towns. Schools received first aid training. Volunteers learned how to help during emergencies. Every action felt like a small ripple of the courage she had shown on that one unforgettable day. Months later, she heard about the foundation through a local newspaper. She was sitting in the teacher's lounge when a colleague showed her the article saying, "Look at this. Isn't it wonderful what he's doing?" She read the piece silently, her eyes softening as she reached the last paragraph. There was a short line that caught her heart. Sometimes one act of kindness changes not just a life, but an entire world. She knew then that he had written that line. That evening, she sat at her small desk and wrote him a letter. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs thanking him for what he had done. She didn't mention the past or the media or the pain they had gone through. She only said she was proud that his change had turned into something beautiful for others. When he received her letter, he smiled quietly. He read it several times before placing it in a drawer beside his son's drawing, the one that said, "My family of kindness." A few weeks later, he decided to visit her school again. This time, he didn't come in a luxury car or with security. He drove himself, parked on the side of the road, and walked through the school gates carrying a small box. She was surprised to see him. It had been months since their last meeting. He smiled and said softly, "I brought something for your classroom." The children gathered around, curious. When he opened the box, there were small safety kits, colorful books about kindness and helping others, and a framed picture of the new foundation's logo, a simple heart-shaped flame. The children clapped and thanked him, and he told them, "This is for people who believe in doing good even when no one is watching." After class, when the children left, she walked with him to the small garden behind the school. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. She looked at him with quiet pride. "You've changed more lives than you realize," she said. He shook his head gently. "You started it. I just followed." They stood there for a while, the breeze carrying the faint sound of laughter from the playground. He turned to her and said, "You know, for years I thought strength came from power, from control, but now I see it comes from compassion, from the courage to care." She smiled softly, That's the kind of strength that never fades. He looked at her, his expression warm. I don't know how to thank you properly. You didn't just save my son that day. You saved me too from becoming someone I never wanted to be. She shook her head gently. You saved yourself. I only reminded you what was already inside you. There was silence between them then. Not uncomfortable, but peaceful. The kind of silence where everything that needed to be said was already understood. As time went on, their friendship continued quietly. They didn't see each other every week or talk about the past much. Instead, they stayed connected through the work they both cared about, helping children, promoting safety, and reminding people of the power of kindness. Every few months, he would invite her to small community events where the foundation helped schools like hers. She always came, but she never stood on stage or sought attention. She preferred to stay among the children, helping them learn. That humility was what made her so different, and what kept inspiring him. His son grew older and often talked about becoming a firefighter or a doctor one day. I want to help people like she helped me, he'd say. Every time his father's eyes would fill with quiet pride. One afternoon, after an event in the city, the three of them sat together at a park bench, him, his son, and her. The boy was playing with a paper airplane while the two adults watched. She's my hero, the boy said suddenly, pointing at her. She saved me. She smiled and said gently, and now you'll save others one day. That's how kindness travels, from one heart to another. The man looked at her and said softly, that's the best thing anyone could ever give. A kindness that keeps moving forward. Years passed, and their story became something people quietly remembered, but rarely spoke about. It wasn't a dramatic love story or a tale of fame. It was simply a story about two lives that collided through tragedy and grew through compassion. Even when they grew older, they stayed in touch, sometimes through letters, sometimes through short visits. Their friendship never needed labels or explanations. It was built on something deeper than words, gratitude, respect, and the quiet joy of knowing that one moment of courage could truly change everything. On the anniversary of the accident, he and his son always lit a candle together. They didn't do it out of sadness, but as a reminder that light can come from the darkest moments. And somewhere in her small home, she would light a candle too. She never told anyone why, but she always smiled when she did. It was her quiet way of remembering that day, not for the fear or the danger, but for the life that came after it. One evening, years later as they met again at a community event, he said, you know, I used to believe fate was something that just happened to us, but now I think fate gives us chances, and what we do with them decides who we become. She looked at him, eyes warm with kindness. Then I'd say you chose well, he smiled, only because someone once reminded me what goodness looks like. The air was calm around them, filled with the sound of people laughing and children playing. It wasn't the kind of ending that needed grand words or music. It was simple, human, and true. Man who had once believed in power now believed in kindness. A woman who had acted from the heart changed, a life without meaning to, and a child who had once been trapped in fire now lived in a world lit by compassion. The calm story of that one moment, a burning car, a brave woman, and a grateful father, and became more than a story. It became a quiet lesson for everyone who heard it, that even the smallest act of goodness can create ripples that reach far beyond what we can see. And sometimes, that one act doesn't just save a life, and it saves a heart too.